Thanks for being here. And I'm really excited to talk about the Farm Transformation Toolkit. Farm transformation has been the better part of my life for the last 4 to 5 years. And it's a really exciting topic. I have spent times on almost all sides of the animal rights and plant based food movement as an activist, as an entrepreneur, and also I like to consider myself a farm geek. I always tell the farmers I'm not a farmer, I'm a farm geek. I love what you do, and I'm really inspired to help you. And so for me, the farm system, after watching the food industry for so long, I realized that the farm system was where we had to start if we wanted to really fix things. That we had made a lot of changes in consumer choices over the last several decades. I'd seen a massive amount of change there. And a lot of those changes did trickle back to farmers, and that was really exciting. But in the meantime, so many other things have happened in the world to shift the role of farmers and the challenges that they're facing. And they really have their backs against the wall at a time right now where we need them to be completely motivated and inspired to get involved, to make changes, and to innovate. So this is the Farm Transformation Toolkit, and it's going to have a lot of words and a lot of things, and I'm going to walk through it kind of slowly, but it's a really big topic when you're talking about complete overhaul of a system that's been entrenched for more than 100 years as we think of modern industrialized animal farming. So the overview, we're going to talk about what is farm transformation. We're going to talk about why it's important. Farm culture, because that's a lot of questions people have, is how are farmers going to get into this, and why would they want to do it? Why make that change? What are the obstacles and tools to a grassroots approach? A blueprint for a grassroots approach. That's the obstacles and tools for a systemic approach, meaning overhauling the whole farm system, which is a lot of it's a much larger conversation, but that is why we need the support of so many other organizations to get involved, and where to start, as well as some helpful resources, and then we'll have the Q&A. I actually received this quote in my inbox just yesterday. I'm a big fan of Farm Aid. If some of you remember, it is an organization that started with a concert that was thrown by Neil Young and John Mellencamp when they realized they had to do something about farmers who were losing their lands due to bank mortgages. And so they threw this big concert called Farm Aid, and they thought that was kind of going to solve everything. And it turns out one concert really couldn't solve everything, but it did bring the world's attention, which was really important. And they went on later to go to Congress and make large changes and save a lot of farmland. And they're still very active. And so support the land and the people that want to care for the land. We have to keep letting farmers know that we believe in them. It starts with you. And, after being an animal activist for many years, that was a really hard thing to start believing in farmers. But when you get to know them and you see the choices that they find themselves forced to make on a daily basis, you begin to really have a lot of compassion. And a lot of farm transformation starts with empathy. So to give an overview, the idea is that we want to change the food system, we have to change farming. Transitioning farmers is going to touch myriad levels of a broken food system. And both grassroots and systemic change must take place simultaneously to be effective. Worldwide, there are like 70 billion animals being farmed every year, and that makes it one of the largest and most entrenched systems in the world. Whereas, to put that in perspective, there's only about 10.5 million people incarcerated worldwide, and that's a huge number, and it's awful and it's tragic. But to put that in context with working with the prison system as opposed to working with the animal livestock system, there's just so many massive layers as well to livestock where, there's not just farming, obviously, there's integration and production and processing and packaging. And the whole supply chain is much more complicated than almost any other industry. And so figuring out how to dismantle the barriers that exist to making change and then incentivizing change are the approach that we've taken. All organizations can work together to contribute support. And that's why at the Farm Transformation Institute, we realized this was a large problem, and we needed the support of everyone to look at how could their organizations get involved, and where do we each work together and build a really systemic approach to change. And so our hope is to rebuild a food system that's not only humane, but also equitable, It's, focused on food justice and regenerative and also inclusive. Farm transformation, just to be really clear, is the process of supporting the transition of farmers away from livestock and towards more sustainable sectors such as plant-based food, renewable power, watershed management tools. And so we do that through economic strategy, innovation, research, and focusing on building empathy and resiliency between our teams and farmers. And we all here, I believe, know the issues with livestock farming, but some of the ones that sometimes people don't think about are the inequity for farmers as well, and the financial insecurity that they face, and the fact that, given today's context, with the pandemic, we've noticed that animal livestock farming leaves us incredibly vulnerable to food security issues. And so I like to think of what we're transitioning to as stewardship farming. So for me, it's the idea that the farmers are stewards. Really, that's their role. And so every farmer should be stewarding the land. And our focus with them is to be regenerative so that what they're doing does last, and it builds and it improves over time, that they sequester carbon. Ideally, they're plant-based, and they continue to innovate, and they build more resilient structures for the people and the animals and the planet. And just to be very clear, when we talk about farm transformations or farm transitions, we're not speaking about regenerative farmers or subsistence farmers or backyard enthusiasts. Those are all very different topics. And why it's important, and back to this idea, when we think of farmers, I like to call them the micro-influencers of the planet. Every farmer on average is farming 208 acres, I think, and they're affecting the water and the food and the soil for the whole planet. So the choices they make are influencing everything to come after them. And so we really need them, but because without them, our food system crumbles further. And so we're all between sort of a rock and a hard place, where farmers need us and we need them. And, the pandemic has really highlighted the reason we need a more resilient local food supply chains as well. So the farmers are absolutely key for maintaining those and improving them now. And it gets complicated though, because our farmers are going through such a different time period. As I mentioned, the smaller farmers are disappearing, and so we're seeing increasing consolidation with the bigger farmers. The farmers are getting older. The average age of a farmer across the world, I believe, is 65 and a half right now. It's the oldest it's ever been. We have a massive farmer age gap growing. So we do have many young farmers, new farmers, first generation farmers entering, and we have a much, much larger group of aging out farmers. And so that's really, really puts us in a difficult situation in terms of shared knowledge and making decisions, because as those farmers age out, also we lose those farms again to more conglomeratization. And one of the positive points about farming as well is that a large number of women are involved in farms, more so than in other business categories. And so we see a lot of decisions being made by women, which affects the entire community when we help farmers, and that makes a big difference. Farm culture, why farmers are really a unique group of people, and understanding their mindset and these themes is really important to be able to relate to them. And for animal activists, I think this is really hard, because you could say, wow, we've been working to stop animal farming for so long. How are we going to help them? But we're all one world, and working together and solving problems of this magnitude requires thinking truly compassionately and understanding that many farmers, were born into the role that they have, and they made choices. They felt choices between animals and their family. And so, given I'm lucky that I'm privileged to never have had to make that choice. And so it's very hard to judge them. And when you come in with a non-judgmental attitude, and the farmers understand that you're really there to work with them and to support them, and that you understand the challenges that they face, they're very receptive, I find. And so farmers themselves are really proud of themselves. When they walk into a store in their community, people say, "Hey, farmer, how are you?" They really identify with being that. And although there are global differences that are definitely unique in the farmers I've talked to around the world, these points seem to be pretty unilaterally resonant with them, that they're very insular and, distrustful of agendas, distrustful of activists, distrustful of corporations because, historically those corporations have been really extractive and exploitive, and they worry about their future. But on the other side of things, they're also really desperate to innovate, and they want to be part of the solution. They are really tired of being under the thumb of a lot of the corporate interests. And they also, everything that they do that's successful, they share within their community quite well. They have their own social network, so to speak. They're incredibly engaged with their neighbors, and everybody is watching. So when one farmer has a success at something, a regional approach is really amazing because it spreads, it spreads very virally within the community. And why do farmers want to make a change is always the big question. And the truth is, honestly, we've never gone looking for farmers. Farmers always have found us. And the ones who want to make the change are actively looking, and there is not a lot of support for them. So it's pretty easy for them to find the tools. Ultimately, the reasons that we found to be in common with why that they've made those changes are lifestyle. Often they have degenerating health conditions coming from eating animal products, or farming in general. Animal farming makes people more sensitive to a lot of issues like COPD and lymphoma. They have higher rates of those in livestock farming. So we find a lot of farmers who are coping with issues that are degenerative. There's also generational change. Often farms have passed on to the children or even the grandchildren, and those children want to do something differently. They might be vegan or animal friendly, and they're ready to use the land to do something better with it that's regenerative, and they're more familiar with a lot of these concepts already, and very motivated to do that. Financial independence. A lot of farmers are really under the thumb, especially in the poultry industry. There has been a lot of amazing work done there by groups to show that the system is very extractive and exploitive, and it's almost impossible to win at. It's a pretty difficult system for the farmers, and over time they just become more and more indebted, and they are definitely in a difficult situation, which is a lever. It's an unfortunate one, but it is some reason that farmers do want to make changes. Obviously, there's information exposure like everybody else. Farmers see What the Health or Cowspiracy, and it provides a lot of food for thought. And we do hear that from farmers as well, that they've seen this film and it changed their life. And the most common experience, and a lot of these can be overlapping experiences, the most common experience we see is farmers who for some reason had to connect with a younger animal, perhaps a baby cow who lost its mother, needed to come into the house. And so for the first time, their circle of sentience begins to expand, as they say at the Sentient Institute, that they begin to see that cow now as a member of their emotional circle. And then they look out and they see all of the animals around them with different eyes. And that's a very common experience. And sometimes someone who's worked with animals for 50 years all of a sudden has an experience, but it usually involves this really deep connection to one animal. And so one of the things we look at is, how do we target those experiences? How do we market to those experiences or campaign to those experiences, and encourage groups who might lead us to some of those factors in specific farmers as well. There are obstacles and tools to the grassroots approach, which would be something like, hey, we found an amazing farm. We talked to them and they want to do something different. Some of the things that you're going to run up against would be that many farmers, especially small farmers, they get by on tax exemptions. The USDA provides tax exemptions for livestock rearing. So just for having cattle on your property in Texas, you could get a $40,000 tax exemption. And sometimes that's enough to keep a small farmer engaged, is just getting that exemption. So that's an issue we find with a lot of small farmers. But there are, if you have research on your side, there are many other exemptions that we can pass through, whether it's native grasses, creating riparian corridors, or watershed exemptions. And so there are a lot of other ways that we've explored attacking that side of things. The other issue is going to be that they have dedicated assets, right? They're going to have machinery and equipment, and most of a farm's value is either it's going to be on their land or their equipment and their structures. And those tend to be pretty specific, but there's always ways to work with those. And that's where innovation comes in, whether it's converting a chicken house to a mushroom growing facility, really looking at what are their assets and how do we retrofit those and upcycle them so that the farmer can maintain their value. And in fact, often it's the bank who holds the value. And so it's a really important piece that you're able to maintain that. And also there's the issue, speaking of banks, most farmers are living through a cycle of debt. Often the farmers we meet have more than 800,000 plus dollars in debt US. And that's definitely an issue because those debts have to be maintenance. And so any funding plan for them has to include understanding their debt cycle and their bank payments. And so that's a big question for the funding, and to understand it's not like starting a new business with some other entrepreneur. You have to look at this, sort of like a business accelerator, but also understand that they're coming with a lot of baggage. And that has to be taken care of every single month, those payments. Otherwise, you lose the farm. So creating a really good balance sheet and understanding their funding cycle is really essential. And there are a lot of grants out there. And I believe a lot of the work we need to do as a movement is to help to repurpose a lot of the USDA grants, the environmental innovation grants that they have as well would be really good for this purpose. And so one of the other issues we face also with farmers is a lack of know-how. So, just because someone is a chicken farmer doesn't really mean that they can switch and start growing lupin or hemp or oats. That is a really important piece. In fact, because of today's industrialized factory farming, a lot of chicken farmers don't actually even really know the business of chicken farming either. It's become very plug and play, where they're just sort of a middle person, and they don't actually own their chickens and they don't raise them themselves. They just move them through a system. And so what you're asking, especially when you're asking someone to go to crop farming, requires a lot more knowledge in terms of how to work with the land and the seasonal cycles, the weather. That may never have been an issue for them as an animal farmer potentially. And so there's an education piece that probably is, for me, one of the most important pieces, because it's also one of the simplest to provide as well for farmers, because the information is out there about crops. It's really about finding the right crop or the right business plan for them, and getting the education to the farmer and all the farm workers. The other issue, of course, is existing herds. And that's a big question, is what to do with the animals. And I get a lot of calls about that. What do we do with the animals? And that's a really great question. And it's a messy one. And we don't always have the answer to that. And that's one of the nice things about working with smaller farms, is that you have a lot less animals. Ideally, for FDI, our purposes have always been that the animals are removed to sanctuaries if the funding is there, or they stay on the property. As for me, that's a little bit of social justice for the animals to become part of the farm, and become in non-working parts of the farm, but actually get to stay and be part of the balance sheet at the animal care and the animal costs. So that's another cost that has to be figured out. And feeding cows monthly, especially in winter, can be upwards of $10,000 depending on the size of your herd. And so that's a big question. And who owns the herds is really important, whether it's actually the supplier at the end of the supply chain, or the farmer themselves. And so that's a constant negotiation, figuring that one out. And supply chain is a big issue as well. The supply chain exists for animal farming mostly in most rural areas. And when you choose an alternative crop, you have to tap into a new supply chain or build one of your own. And existing contracts, really understanding, are they involved in a contract with a major animal provider for many years? How do they get out of their contract? That's an issue. And on our side, we have a lot of support as well for this. We understand more about the market, the plant-based market. We bring that, and we bring relationships as an industry. We also bring help with marketing and understanding of consumer demand, which is great. And we bring a lot of passion. And I think that shouldn't be underestimated, because when working with farmers, passion and excitement it really catches on, and farmers love that. So when you come in with that and you really see a future for them, they get really excited as well. And I think we shouldn't underestimate that fact. Grassroots Transformation Blueprint. I'm going to walk you through this, and we will have this document available. But so it looks a little wordy, but don't worry. But just to give you an idea of the steps involved in this process, if you wanted to actually work directly with a farm, you got to find a farm, and you get to know the farmer, because they know so much, honestly, and they probably already have ideas about what they could do. Chances are they've had their eyes on their neighbor, watching what they're growing and seeing how they diversify. And so they're going to have plans, and they're going to know their region. You should research all of their contracts. As I mentioned, you should understand the animals on their farm, the life cycles, the production cycles, the potential cost to maintain. You need to survey the land, the assets, the farm process, the cash flow needs, the balance sheets, the debts. Find an alternative crop, or a value add, which is, maybe they have blueberries, but they could be making blueberry jelly, which helps a lot when you have a value added product. It allows a farmer to make a much higher margin than, say, just selling the blueberries. And that depends on the location. Are there farmers markets? Are they close enough to restaurants? And so understanding where you can get a value add for them is really, really great, because it makes them distinctive in the market, and it kind of opens up a niche for them. Or other opportunities, such as, simple things, converting it to a wind farm potentially. And there are great opportunities in terms of wind farm and solar out there if you're in the right area. And, you have to also consider, obviously, the thing that's most important is giving them a high margin crop. Replacing animals with soybeans would be really hard, because soybeans being a commodity crop, it's just really hard for a small farmer to compete. So you're looking for the highest margin potentially in the area that they're in. So it might be something specialty. Maybe it's, gourmet mushrooms. And then building a business plan and a fundraising strategy that clarifies all the costs involved and the bridge finances they're going to need. Because, people always think when they're building a new business, they're going to make money day one. But the truth is, these things take time, and the costs will mount up. And researching grants is really great. There are so many grants out there, especially for farmers. And then planning the educational time, creating a timeline, getting help from any other organizations in the region who want to be involved. And they're out there. There are great farm worker groups and rural farm conglomerates or collectives. And most importantly, if you're going to get involved in that sort of work, make sure you can follow through with your commitment, because these farmers have had a lot of promises made generally throughout their experience. And so it's a big deal for them to trust a group, especially one with a plant-based strategy, to come in and work with them. So it's really important as a movement that we support them and we don't leave them hanging, especially if they do make the choice to leave animal farming. The worst thing that could happen is for them to fail after that, because then they become, sort of a warning fable to the rest of the farm world. And that's the opposite of what we'd want. Systemic obstacles, we'll go through this really quick, but corporate agendas, obviously, lack of policy know-how on progressive policymakers in general are not farm savvy. So a lot of our farm committees in Congress tend to be, whether it's state or federal, tend to be GOP representatives, and because they represent a lot of the farming country. And so they're going to be more associated with corporate agendas typically. And so helping your progressive policymakers understand farm issues so that they can make good choices, even providing them with policy points and support through different progressive policy institutes, is really important. Obviously, farm subsidies are a major issue and need to be overhauled. Incentivizing transformation is really important. We can look at big tobacco and how farmers were incentivized to leave big tobacco. We can look at, there's a great program to incentivize coal farmers now to become beekeepers in the Appalachians, which is doing really well. And crop insurance is another area, because crop insurance is is really antiquated. It hasn't been updated in about 100 years. And so it definitely is weighted against innovation, and it's weighted against risk, and it encourages a lot of unsustainable practices. So crop insurance, and there's a great group working on crop insurance to get involved with. And again, the supply chain is an issue. And so that's where we can work together with market partners in the plant-based movement to build supply chain. And also the crop understanding is not widely, although we know a lot about crops and a lot about soil, it's not widely available to farmers in general. So building an open source database for farmers where they could get regional information about opportunities for them would be really helpful. And where to start? It's a big issue, right? And so how do we get involved with this? And there's a lot of things that you could do, which is first, just find the piece that your organization could do. So if you work in policy advocacy, start designing policies, as I mentioned, that can support and incentivize transformation. Cataloging, researching effective farm business models. Again, research and having information readily available for farmers is really important. Having that economic data is probably the most important. That's the biggest question farmers have to know is, how are we going to make money, and can we do better than we were doing before? And the truth is, yes, they can do a lot better than they do before. A lot of farmers are, maybe netting $10,000 a year sometimes off huge crops. And so there's a lot of room for improvement in this system. Someone could build a really compelling thesis around farmer health. There is a lot of data floating out there on why livestock farming is hard for farmers and on their health, and why degenerative conditions are so prevalent, but it hasn't been collated and made available to the public. And that would be a really great place to start. A free educational program for farmers in your region to learn about a crop for your region would be a really great way to engage with many farmers in the region and get something moving. Contact any of the groups working around the world to collaborate and help farmers connect with resources so that they can work towards change. That's the beginning, is when a farmer reaches out to you, you can connect them to someone who can help just get things moving forward and let them know that around the world, people are working on this. And sometimes this, what they want is to know that there are groups that are helpful, because often they'll be surrounded by neighbors and corporate interests and representatives who are all dependent on the system that they currently work in. So they're kind of in an echo chamber. So just even having groups that actually hear them and have them on their radar and know that they want to change can make a huge difference for them as well. And I put a couple links in here, as well as some groups. The 50 by 40 is very engaged in this process of just transition, as well as the Transformation Project from Mercy for Animals. Miyoko's has a dairy farm conversion project that they're working on. In Switzerland, there's Refarmed, who is working with dairy farms to transition to plant-based milks. And I believe they even sell a retail, or like a milk subscription service from those farms. Refarmed is that. There's Willicroft in the Netherlands, which is a plant-based cheese company that he actually was a third generation dairy farmer, and they're working to find dairy farms in the Netherlands who are willing to grow beans. Stray Dog Institute in the US, as well, has been working to coordinate our efforts here. And then also there's a group called the Just Rural Transition, which focuses on farmers and rural communities and farm workers to help create more equitable transitions. And thanks. I'm happy to share about our work sometime if you want to speak to me or collaborate. That's my email, and I'd be happy to take questions now.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing and very, there's so much information to take in. I'm not surprised that there are so many questions. We're going to jump right into them. Brian is asking about what civil society can do. So environmental groups, animal protection, health, food justice NGOs, what can they do to support the transition of farms? You did talk about some of the key levers, but perhaps you could review them.
Absolutely. There are so many things that you can do. And I think for each group, it's about like, what's your specialty? Do you work in policy? Are you working on subsidies? Are you working on consumer awareness? Are you working directly with plant-based companies to build campaigns? And so finding the piece that your group does best would be, I think, the way to make our efforts most effective. And so getting plant-based companies to highlight farmers making changes, supporting the farmers who already make changes, because it's really hard and sometimes they do fail. And so highlighting their stories on social media and bringing awareness to them, and encouraging people to buy from them or whatever that is, and really finding who in your area is doing this and trying to help them, and actually engaging with farmers when you do. If you're an NGO who works with animal farms to make changes, letting them know that, look, we're not just trying to shut you down. We actually want to help you. In the Art of War, that there's the whole thing where Caesar lands and he burns the boats and tells his warriors to fight because you're not going home. And that's how I like to think of it. Is I feel like as activists, we kind of burn the boats. And so farmers have nothing to do but fight. And so what we have to do is start building boats for them, because otherwise they're just going to fight. That's all they feel like they have left. And so, find out how your organization can build a boat, I think, is the best way for them.
One of the ways that you talked about building of boats was the tax exemptions. And we had to go through it really, really quickly, but there's definitely been a sort of low-flying conversation over the last few days about subsidies and about how to address that to support transformation. Can you speak to that for a moment?
Absolutely. Well, I know there's a great group called Lobbyists for Change. That is one of the only groups that I know that's dealing with the subsidy question in the US. And I know subsidies are an issue throughout the world. It's one of our ways that in the farming system, we have made animal farming actually profitable, because it's not that profitable otherwise. And so I think the question is, how do we, actually England has just announced, due to Brexit, that they are going to be pulling, I think, 1.5 billion pounds from the farm subsidies, and they're going to be repurposing them towards regenerative practices and trees and wildlife habitat and more animal welfare standards. And so that's really great news. And on Just Rural Transition, a lot of leaders there in the agriculture space talk about too, is how do we repurpose these subsidies so that we're not pulling the plug completely on farmers, because their lifestyle definitely depends on that. And when you talk about pulling the plug from them with the subsidies, it's a really unpopular conversation as well. But they do need money in order to steward the land like the way that we want them to be these guardians and to start improving every piece of land that they touch. They're going to need support. And so it's really about people and organizations who are working in policy advocacy who can look at how do we incentivize and use our subsidies to protect waterways, and what almost everything we do in regenerative agriculture will just naturally move us away from industrialized factory farming because it's antithetical. So
I'm going to move to our next question. This is about the other end of things. So here we've been talking about grants and levers for helping create a pathway to change. Liu is actually asking about the other side of things. How can we involve consumers and society to maximum effects in farm transformation?
yeah, that's a great question. I think we need to make it more visible. And it has not really been visible unless you've picked up a few of the social media articles that some of our great media organizations have written. You don't know about this as a concept. And so we really need plant-based companies to let consumers know by supporting, by highlighting farmers, by buying from these farmers, by notating that this is from a transformed farm on their packaging, encouraging in the same way that we've had transitional organics. And we know that by buying that product, we're supporting a farm who's going organic. We really need to be able to do the same thing. And we need that sort of public awareness on that this is a value, and that when you buy this chickpea, you're actually potentially not just buying chickpeas, but you're actually saving lives right now, every day with it. And so I think campaigns around consumer awareness of these farms is important.
We just had a session on storytelling about an hour ago now, and that is exactly what she was speaking about as well. That if you tell a story about the way that people are participating in change, that it kind of creates this momentum behind the whole idea of being connected and getting excited about the things that you support. So it's really interesting that you're seeing that also from the experience of what we take from the field and how we
I
feel good
agree.
about it in the consumer life. It's really interesting.
You know, Patagonia Provisions has done a really good job of this. So Patagonia created a line called Patagonia Provisions, which is about supporting farmers who want to start growing heirloom food in the US. And so they highlight each farmer and they have a story, and you can buy a very specific heirloom variety of wheat or beans. And I think as a movement, we need to figure out how to tell that story, just like you said, in our packaging, and get people excited about bringing these farms back to relevance and humanity.
This is so awesome. I have to say, I am a fellow farm geek, and we are right in my zone. I'm going to go to a question from Rishi, who asks: the obstacles and tools remind me of the permaculture principle. The problem is the solution, and it seems that most obstacles, if solved successfully, could be powerful points of leverage for transition. And Genevieve, you'd like to know if that's your experience.
Yeah, actually, good point, Rishi. That's kind of why I counterpointed them in that way, because for me, that's exactly how I look at it. It's every pain point is just pointing to a potential solution, and so it's not like we have to reinvent all of these ideas. They're right there, and the fact is, the farming system, the entrenchment of the farming system can work to our advantage. There's a USDA office in every single county of the US. And in every country that the farm system itself has entrenched itself to the level that it's so deeply involved with city and local governments and corporations, that if we can actually harness that power, we have quite an amazing vehicle for transformation. And that's why systemic change, although hard to swallow, is really going to be effective, because we do have this amazing infrastructure laid out that's willing to support. And so if you call up your local ag office and say, hey, we're teaching a class on how to grow oats for some oat milk purveyors that we have who are interested in this region, usually the ag office is going to say, that's great, that's amazing, thanks, we'll let all the farmers know. Like, that's their entire job. Most of these ag offices is to disperse and disseminate information, and so we can really use them.
It's interesting that you're speaking about the immense power to be tapped here. We had Dolores Huerta with us 2 days ago, who speaks so genuinely and deeply about the power that people hold in their bodies, that there is always a lot of power in farming communities that can be harnessed and enabled. And that's exactly where this conversation takes us, really into the how-to. Like, how do we harness that power? How do we make it respectful? How do we build that trust? The trust one I really want to come back to, where we only have 6 minutes left, so I hope we can ask all these questions, but I find that such an interesting, you kept mentioning it over and over again, and it seems to be such a key element for making any of this work. Craig Grant is asking, is the time of redesigning farm systems also an opportunity to look at localization and scientific solutions? For example, if we could make cell ag cheap enough to have a cell ag plant in every city, and thus deglobalizing some supply chains.
I love this question, and I was hoping we'd get to it. Absolutely, this is one of my favorite pet passions. Is how do we rebuild cell ag? Cell ag is the newest industry to come to the world. It has no baggage, it has no infrastructure, and it has a real large chance to become a major solution. And it can go one of two ways. It can become siloed and become another industrialized food practice, or we could take our lessons about local supply chains and we can apply them, and we can teach farmers to build DIY bioreactors, and we can actually have them grow the substrates they need, and have them absolutely participate in many steps of the process. And then we do have an amazing local and secure food system, and we have farm on our side. We can bring the cell ag industry to farmers. We can bring it to fisheries. And we have tuna fisheries in Indonesia calling us and saying, how do we shift? We have 50 fishing boats. And so these solutions are absolutely necessary. And I do agree with you that cell ag is one of the ways we can lead with this.
This is a question from NA. There's a lot of great information here. Is there a place where I can find this presentation or information online?
That's a great question. Thank you. I spoke to the team at 50 by 40, and that is our hope. I designed it so it would be a takeaway. So I hope that we'll be able to get it back out to you. If not, my email is on my profile in the registry, and you can ask me and I can send it to you directly.
It's a great reminder to everybody to please use all the connecting resources that we have, from the app to the website that's been set up for this summit, so that you can find people when they've delivered information that you really needed, but we had to go through it so fast and you still have questions. We have 2 more questions left. Lisa is asking, what role in farm transformation do you see for governments? This is interesting. So we've had the civil society conversation, the trust and policy conversation, and this is really about working with the government. What do you think about the Dutch government buying out pig farmers in the Netherlands who want to quit?
Yeah, I think government has to take a role at this point, because if they're not supporting it, they're probably, doing the opposite. And I think it's a great thing that they're doing that. I love that the government in Costa Rica, how they pay the farmers actually credits to regenerate the forests. I think we're at the point where we need all the help we can get, and the government has been actively working against regenerative ag and organic food for so long that any steps they take on that, in my opinion, I'm a huge fan of. And we're at an end game now where we really need to make some quick and bold moves, and we'll have to see how they play out ultimately. And there's not going to be any right way. Like I said, it's going to be kind of messy, but what we want to avoid is small farmers disappearing in the process, because dealing with big ag is actually much harder than dealing with small farmers. And so we want whatever it takes to dealing with big ag. They're just they're more entrenched. There's more investment. They're doing much better typically than your average small farmer, who is willing to make a change if you can get them alone, basically. And so we want to keep those small farmers there for so many reasons. But so anything we can do, in my opinion, is we should try all steps.
I want to give the last question to Stan, who says, I feel we're using the word farmer a lot, which is really such a diverse group of people. How do you define the word farmer, and what do you think are the stereotypes other people's minds go to when thinking of farmers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Farmer is a word that the farmers themselves use a lot. Like, it's a very strong identification tool within the community. It's a real point of respect I've found in all the farming communities that I've spoken with. And there are definitely stereotypes, and they're different probably in every culture. Actually, that's an area where cultural touch points tend to differ, because there are a lot more associations in different places with that word. I know here in the U.S., often people think of, an older male, and a lot of our work also has to really bring forward farmers of different communities who are less visible, including Black farmers. The Black Farming Belt is a group I'm a big fan of. And how do we change the notion of farmer? And for me, it's really a steward. That's what I want farmer to equate with, is someone who's a steward, who takes care of where they are. And they all look very differently. And there's a lot more women involved than people typically think, which is also, when you help a woman in a community, you help, families and the entire community, which is another reason it's such a valuable place for me. And there's also a lot of young people entering in for the first time. In many generations, we're seeing an influx of people who are wanting to get back to the land for various reasons. And so it is very diverse. That's a really great point.
I think this year has also really brought out that urge to feel a connection with the land, to understand that we can live more, that we can live in a really different way. I find there's an openness to that's quite phenomenal. It's one of the silver linings of 2020.
Well said. It's a big opportunity. Actually, we're seeing sort of the opposite of the exodus to the cities, and that will change things enormously. And it's going to put a lot more understanding into the cultural conversation about farmers as well. So that's a really exciting piece for me too.
What a great place for us to land. Genevieve, I could talk to you for another 2 hours. Thank you so much for giving us this hyper concentrated version of the work that you do. I have a strong suspicion that you're about to get quite a few emails and tweets as people get more curious. So thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with us today.